Imagine this scenario. The air is thick with the smell of stale coffee and fear. 47 terrified neighbors are squeezed into a room meant for 20. Fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead like angry hornets. And standing at the front is a woman with a smile that could freeze a volcano, screaming at me to sit down and pay my fines, unaware that she is about to walk directly into a buzzsaw of federal justice. They tried to steal my home, my sanctuary, using a stack of fabricated violations totaling nearly $5,000, all manufactured while I was 200 miles away holding my mother's hand as she took her final breath. But what this corrupt homeowners association president didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed beneath my tear-stained face and grieving silence, was that I wasn't just a helpless widow in a ranch house. I was Judge Evelyn Vance of the United States District Court, and I had been putting criminals smarter than her behind bars for 2 decades. Let's rewind the tape because to understand the explosion, you have to see the fuse being lit, back to when I bought this modest brick house in Oakwood Enclave, a quiet subdivision in Fairfax, Virginia, thinking it would be my escape from the heavy robes and the heavy burden of listening to liars and lawyers argue semantics all day long. For 3 years, I was invisible, just Evelyn, the lady who waved from her porch and complained about the humidity, hiding my badge and my background because I desperately needed to be normal, to be someone other than Your Honor, living in a community of retirees and young families where the biggest scandal was usually someone leaving their trash cans out too long. That anonymity was my shield until the nightmare began last spring, starting with a phone call that no child ever wants to receive, the one that tells you time is up. So I packed a bag, hired Greenleaf Landscaping, which was fully approved by the board, to handle the yard, and drove to Baltimore to sit in a hospice room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope, watching the strongest woman I ever knew slowly disappear. The day after the funeral, I drove back to Fairfax with eyes so swollen I could barely see the road, walking into a house that smelled musty and abandoned, only to find my front door barricaded by a mountain of certified mail. A cruel welcome home gift from the people who were supposed to be my neighbors. My hands were trembling, not from fear but from a mixture of grief and rising disbelief, as I tore open the thick envelope marked Final Notice from the Oakwood Enclave HOA, listing violations that read like a work of fiction: grass exactly half an inch too long, a mailbox that was the wrong shade of forest green, and unauthorized landscaping removal, all dated during the weeks I was sitting by a deathbed, all accusing me of neglect when I was barely holding my own soul together. The letter, signed with a flourish by Karen Sterling, the HOA president, demanded payment within 10 days or they would begin foreclosure proceedings, a threat so aggressive it felt like a physical slap, prompting me to pick up the phone and dial her number, hoping for a shred of humanity. "Rules are rules, Ms. Vance," Karen said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern that bullies use to mask their cruelty. "Grief is tragic, of course, but it's not an exemption clause for property neglect, and perhaps if you can't handle the responsibilities of a single-family home, you'd be more comfortable in an assisted living facility." A comment so patronizing, so vile, that it flipped a switch deep inside my brain. The part of me that had presided over racketeering trials and fraud cases, transforming my grief into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I hung up the phone and didn't cry. Instead, I went to work, taking evening walks that looked aimless but were actually reconnaissance missions, noticing 3 other homes with for sale signs, all of which had recently been slapped with violation notices, and public records quickly revealed that all 3 had been sold to an entity called Sterling Foundations LLC for tens of thousands below market value, a company that, surprise, shared a last name with our dear HOA president. The pattern was clumsy, almost insulting to my intelligence, with violation letters containing the exact same formatting errors, the same spacing issues, proving they were churned out by the same person on the same computer, targeting the vulnerable, the elderly, and the grieving. The real shock came when I saw Karen's silver Mercedes parked in the driveway of Mrs. Higgins, a sweet 80-year-old woman living 3 doors down, who I could see through the window, clutching a piece of paper and weeping while Karen loomed over her. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about me. It was a business model, a predatory scheme designed to strip equity from people who were too broken to fight back. 2 days later, an emergency meeting notice appeared in my mailbox, violating the 7-day notice bylaw, calling for a gathering to address property standards, which was code for a public shaming session designed to break me. I walked into that community center, a depressing room with peeling paint and a broken air conditioner that made the air feel like a swamp. Watching Karen Sterling hold court at a folding table like a queen on a throne, flanked by her nephew Braden, a 19-year-old with a clipboard who looked like he'd rather be playing video games than destroying lives. "We are here to discuss a serious blight," Karen announced, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that showed photos of my home, my grass which looked identical to everyone else's, and my approved mailbox, while I stood up, clutching a binder thick with evidence, and asked, "May I present my defense?" "This isn't a courtroom, Ms. Vance," she sneered, unaware of the irony that would eventually hang her. "We don't need lawyers or theatrics here. We have the evidence of our certified inspector," she gestured to Braden, "and the board has already moved to file liens to protect the community's assets." The room, filled with 12 terrified residents, went silent as I pulled out my phone and said, "For the record, I am recording this meeting as is my right under state law, and you are admitting to filing liens without due process based on violations that occurred while I was documented as being out of state," which wiped the smirk off her face for a split second, but she recovered, banging her gavel, a literal gavel she had brought from home, and declaring the motion carried without even letting the residents vote. As I walked out, a man named Sergeant Major Rhett Miller, a veteran with eyes that missed nothing, slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand and whispered, "You're not the first, ma'am, and you won't be the last," leaving me to unfold the note in my car, revealing a handwritten list of 15 addresses, dates of violations, and sale prices, a roadmap of destruction that confirmed Karen Sterling wasn't running a neighborhood. She was running a racketeering enterprise. Karen didn't like being challenged, and she certainly didn't like being recorded, so the next morning marked the beginning of a psychological war, starting at 6 a.m. sharp, when her silver Mercedes crunched up my driveway like a tank breaching enemy lines. She stepped out in pristine white capris and a polo shirt, followed by Braden, who was wielding a measuring tape and a camera with the enthusiasm of a prisoner serving a sentence. And for the next week, this became my alarm clock, a daily wellness check, where they measured the distance of my tires from the curb, photographed non-existent weeds, and even cited me for my porch light being too yellow, an assault designed to harass me into submission. The pettiness escalated into systemic isolation when my key fob to the community pool stopped working due to a system glitch that only affected my account, and Greenleaf Landscaping suddenly quit, telling me off the record that Karen had threatened to ban them from the entire neighborhood if they touched my grass again. It was a siege, plain and simple, aimed at making my life so unbearable that I would sell my house to Sterling Foundations LLC just to escape. But what Karen failed to realize was that she was poking a bear that had spent 18 years wrestling with federal prosecutors and cartel leaders. I took a week of leave, not to grieve, but to hunt, spending my days in the basement of the Fairfax County Courthouse, a place that smelled of dust mites and history, digging through archives that hadn't seen the light of day since the 90s. The pattern I found was breathtaking in its audacity. 23 homes in our subdivision had been forced into foreclosure or distress sales in the last 5 years, stripping over $2 million in equity from families who were divorced, widowed, or hospitalized, with every single property eventually flipping to shell companies controlled by the Sterling family. During my research, I connected with Sarah Jenkins, a young accountant facing fines for having a tricycle in her driveway, and she introduced me to Marcus Thorne, a local attorney who had been trying to build a case against the HOA for months but lacked the smoking gun. We met in his office, a chaotic room buried under case files, and when he showed me the map of the victims, I knew it was time to drop the veil, so I leaned forward and said, "Marcus, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." And when I revealed my federal credentials, the color drained from his face, replaced quickly by a look of fierce determination. "She's violated the Fair Housing Act, committed mail fraud, wire fraud, and is operating a RICO enterprise," I explained, outlining the statutes as if I were writing a sentencing memo. "But we need to nail the coffin shut. We need something that bypasses her current board entirely." That something was buried in a misfiled box in the county clerk's office, The original 1994 Articles of Incorporation for Oakwood Enclave, which contained a homeowner bill of rights and, more importantly, an emergency dissolution clause that could suspend the board immediately if 25% of the homeowners signed a petition citing financial malfeasance. The final piece of the puzzle, the catalyst that turned this from a fraud case into a personal vendetta, fell into my lap when I was leaving the courthouse and overheard Karen on her cell phone in the parking garage, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "We need to accelerate the pressure on Vance," she was saying, unaware I was recording from behind a pillar. "My financing for the duplex project expires next month, and I need her corner lot to combine with the empty one we already stole, so I don't care if you have to fake the signatures. Just get the foreclosure started." She wasn't just greedy. She was desperate, leveraging the entire financial future of her family's failing construction business on stealing my home. I went back to my dining room, which had been transformed into a war room covered in timelines, color-coded maps, and financial spreadsheets, and gathered my team, Sergeant Major Miller, Sarah, and Marcus, laying out the plan to trigger the nuclear option. We needed 45 signatures to activate the 1994 clause, and thanks to Miller's quiet networking, we already had 37 families ready to revolt. But Karen, sensing the walls closing in, made a fatal error, a move so reckless it reeked of panic. She announced a surprise special assessment meeting, demanding $500 from every household for emergency repairs that didn't exist, a frantic cash grab to loot the accounts before she went down. She thought she was calling a meeting to rob us, but she was actually inviting us to her own execution, unaware that I had turned the terrified Mrs. Higgins, the witness she had bullied into signing fake reports, into our star witness, ready to burn the whole conspiracy to the ground. The community center was suffocating that Wednesday, packed with nearly 50 residents fanning themselves with violation notices, the air thick with the smell of nervous sweat and the metallic tang of impending violence. Karen Sterling sat at the front, looking frantic, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal, flanked by her cousin, a Fairfax County Sheriff's deputy who looked like he was seriously reconsidering his life choices. She banged her gavel, shouting over the murmurs, "We are here to address a threat to this community, specifically the harassment and stalking committed by Ms. Vance, and Officer Sterling here is prepared to issue citations." It was a bold lie, the desperate gasp of a dying regime, and as the deputy awkwardly stood up, clutching a folder of falsified complaints, I knew it was time to end the show. Mrs. Higgins, trembling but resolute, stood up from the front row and interrupted. "Stop it. Karen, I won't do it anymore," her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I signed those papers because you said you'd take my house, but I never saw Ms. Vance violate a single rule. It was all lies, all of it." The room erupted, neighbors gasping and turning to one another, while Karen shrieked, "She's senile. Don't listen to her." But the dam had broken. I stood up slowly, the calm in the eye of the hurricane, and walked to the front of the room, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. "Officer," I said, locking eyes with the deputy, "before you proceed with these fabricated charges, you should know that you are currently acting as an accessory to a federal racketeering conspiracy." Karen laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "Who do you think you are? You're just a bitter old woman with a dead lawn." I reached into my purse, bypassing the phone, bypassing the notes, and pulled out the leather wallet that held my life's work. "My name is Patricia Evelyn Vance, and I am a senior judge for the United States District Court," I announced, flipping the badge open so the gold eagle caught the fluorescent light, sending a beam of absolute authority across the room. "And for the last 6 months, I have been documenting a criminal enterprise operating out of this HOA." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where Karen's power used to be. The deputy looked at the badge, looked at his cousin, and took 3 distinct steps away from her, realizing his career was hanging by a thread. "I have audio recordings of conspiracy to commit wire fraud," I continued, my voice projecting without a microphone. "I have forensic accounting proving the theft of $2 million, and I have the original 1994 bylaws which, as of this petition signed by majority homeowners, immediately dissolves this board and suspends your authority." Karen lunged for the microphone, screaming, "You can't do this. This is entrapment." But the spell was broken. I pulled out my phone and hit the speed dial I had set up earlier. Special Agent Reynolds? This is Judge Vance. The subjects are on site. Execute the warrant. The doors swung open and the FBI swept in, not with drama, but with the terrifying, quiet efficiency of professionals, agents and windbreakers moving through the crowd to handcuff Karen, Braden, and the other complicit board members. The sight of Karen Sterling, the woman who had terrorized grieving widows, being read her Miranda rights while the entire neighborhood recorded it on their phones, was a level of catharsis that no courtroom verdict could ever match. In the aftermath, the justice was total. Karen pleaded guilty to avoid a 30-year sentence, taking 8 years in federal prison instead, and Sterling Foundations LLC was liquidated, with every penny of the assets going back to the family she had robbed. I received a settlement of $47,000, which I immediately donated to a scholarship fund in my mother's name. And the neighborhood transformed, shedding the fear and becoming a place where people actually waved to each other again. 6 months later, standing in my garden, which is now lush and green, watching the kids play in the pool that is finally open to everyone, I realized that while the law is powerful, it is nothing without people willing to stand up and wield it. We assume that authority figures, whether they are HOA presidents or politicians, have our best interests at heart, but power without oversight is just tyranny waiting to happen. So, here is the question that keeps me up at night, even after the victory. Knowing that systems like this exist in neighborhoods across the country, relying on our silence and our fear to function, do we have a moral obligation to be suspicious of authority, or does that suspicion destroy the very community we are trying to build? Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the gavel.
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.